The morning mist clung to Lake Erie's surface like a shroud, broken only by the silhouettes of warships emerging from the haze. Commander Oliver Hazard Perry stood on the deck of his flagship, the USS Lawrence, watching as the British fleet materialized. Through the fog on September 10, 1813, the young naval officer's hands trembled not from fear, but from the electric anticipation of battle that would determine the fate of American control. Over the Great Lakes, Perry's fingers traced the fabric of his battle flag, emblazoned with the dying words of Captain James Lawrence, "Don't give up the ship." The 28-year-old Rhode Islander had spent months preparing for this moment, constructing a fleet from green timber and manning it with sailors who had never seen naval combat. Across the water, Captain Robert Heriot Barclay commanded the British squadron with the confidence of a seasoned Royal Navy veteran. His HMS Detroit bristling with long-range cannons that could devastate American ships before they could close to effective fighting distance. The American fleet consisted of 9 vessels, including the flagship Lawrence and her sister ship Niagara, both brigs carrying 20 guns each. Perry's smaller gunboats, the Ariel, Scorpion, Somers, Porcupine, Tigress, and Trip, bobbed alongside the converted merchant vessel Caledonia. Each ship represented months of backbreaking labor in the shipyards of Presque Isle, where Perry's men had felled trees, forged iron, and stitched canvas under the constant threat of British attack. The British squadron, though smaller in number, with 6 ships, possessed significant advantages in firepower and crew experience. Barclay's Detroit mounted 19 guns, while the Queen Charlotte carried 17. The Lady Prevost, General Hunter, Little Belt, and Chippewa completed the enemy line, their combined broadsides capable of unleashing devastation upon any ship that dared approach within range. As the morning sun burned away the mist, Perry could see the faces of his men, farmers from Ohio, sailors from the Atlantic ports, and soldiers pressed into naval service. Many had never fired a cannon in anger, yet they stood ready to face the most powerful navy in the world. The commander's tactical plan was simple but dangerous: close with the enemy as quickly as possible to negate their advantage in long-range gunnery, then use America's superior numbers to overwhelm the British line. According to naval historian Samuel Eliot Morrison's comprehensive analysis in the Oxford History of the American People, the Battle of Lake Erie represented one of the most crucial naval engagements in American history, determining control of the Great Lakes and the outcome of the Northwestern Campaign. The wind picked up from the southeast, filling American sails as Perry raised the signal for battle. The Lawrence surged forward, leading the line toward the British fleet arranged in battle formation near Put-in Bay. The distance closed rapidly: 2 miles, then 1, then half a mile as the first British guns opened fire. Iron balls whistled through the rigging, tearing canvas and splintering wood as the 2 fleets converged for what would become the most decisive naval battle of the War of 1812. The thunder of cannons would soon echo across the lake, but in these final moments of peace, Perry offered a silent prayer for his untested fleet and the young republic, whose fate hung in the balance of the coming engagement. The first British broadside erupted at 11:45 in the morning, sending a wall of iron crashing into the American line. The HMS Detroit's long guns found their mark immediately, punching through the Lawrence's hull with devastating effect. Commander Perry felt the deck shudder beneath his feet as splinters of oak flew like deadly arrows through the morning air. The battle for Lake Erie had begun with the fury of a Great Lakes storm. Perry's flagship Lawrence bore the brunt of the British assault as she closed the distance to the enemy line. Captain Barclay had positioned his ships to maximize their long-range firepower advantage, knowing that the American fleet would have to endure punishing fire before their shorter range carronades could respond effectively. The Detroit and Queen Charlotte concentrated their fire on the Lawrence, recognizing her as the American flagship and seeking to decapitate the enemy fleet's command structure. The American response came in deadly earnest as the Lawrence finally closed within effective range. Her 20 carronades, loaded with grape and canister shot, swept the deck of the Detroit with murderous effect. British sailors fell like wheat before the scythe as the heavy guns discharged their loads of iron, balls and metal fragments. The Queen Charlotte, attempting to support her flagship, found herself caught in a crossfire as the American gunboat Scorpion raked her stern. With devastating precision, behind the Lawrence, the USS Niagara under Lieutenant Jesse Elliott maintained a more cautious approach, staying at long range where her guns proved less effective. This tactical decision would later spark controversy, as Perry's flagship absorbed punishment that should have been shared between the two largest American vessels, the smaller American gunboats. However, fought with desperate courage, their crews serving their guns with the mechanical precision of men who knew their lives depended on speed and accuracy. The British line began to show signs of strain as the battle progressed into its second hour. Captain Barclay himself fell wounded when an American ball shattered his remaining good arm. He had lost the other in previous naval combat. The Detroit's masts began to show the effects of concentrated American fire. Her rigging cut to pieces and her hull holed in dozens of places. Yet the British squadron maintained their disciplined fire, their experienced gun crews working their pieces with the methodical efficiency that had made the Royal Navy the terror of the seas. On the Lawrence, the carnage reached horrific proportions. Of her crew of 103 men, 83 lay dead or wounded by early afternoon. The ship's guns fell silent one by one as their crews were cut down, leaving Perry with only a handful of men capable of continuing the fight. The ship's surgeon, working in the blood-soaked cockpit below decks, ran out of space to tend the wounded as the British continued their merciless bombardment. The turning point came when Perry made the desperate decision to abandon his crippled flagship, taking his battle flag and a small boat crew. He set out across the contested waters toward the Niagara, which had remained relatively intact throughout the engagement. British marksmen fired at the small boat as it made its perilous journey. But Perry reached the Niagara safely and immediately assumed command of the fresh vessel. The sight of their commander's flag appearing on the Niagara sent a surge of hope through the American fleet. The tide of battle was about to turn, though the British squadron still maintained their defensive formation. Despite the heavy casualties they had sustained, the afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the smoke-shrouded lake, where the fate of the Northwest Territory hung in the balance of naval gunnery and seamanship. Commander Perry's arrival aboard the Niagara transformed the battle's momentum in a matter of minutes. The fresh warship, her guns loaded and her crew eager for action, represented the striking power that the American fleet had been unable to bring to bear. During the morning's devastating exchange, Perry immediately ordered Lieutenant Elliott to take command of the smaller vessels. While he personally directed the Niagara's assault on the British line, the British squadron, bloodied but still defiant, attempted to maintain their formation. Despite the heavy casualties they had sustained, Captain Barclay, wounded and barely conscious, had passed command to Lieutenant George Inglis, who struggled to coordinate the defense from the shattered deck of the Detroit. The Queen Charlotte, her rigging shot away and her hull taking water, had become entangled with the Detroit, creating a massive target for American guns. Perry seized upon this opportunity with the instinct of a born naval tactician. He ordered the Niagara to sail directly through the British line, a maneuver known as crossing the T that would allow his guns to rake the enemy ships from bow to stern. The British vessels, their mobility compromised by battle damage and the unfortunate collision between their two largest ships, could not maneuver to avoid the devastating attack. The Niagara's passage through the British line marked the climax of the battle. Her starboard guns fired into the Detroit and Queen Charlotte as she passed, while her port batteries engaged the Lady Prevost and General Hunter. The double broadside created carnage on the British vessels, sweeping their decks clear of men and dismounting several of their guns. The American carronades, loaded with grape shot at close range, proved devastatingly effective against the packed British crews. Lieutenant Robert Finnis, commanding the Queen Charlotte, fell dead as the Niagara's guns found their mark. His ship, already badly damaged and entangled with the Detroit, began to strike her colors and surrender. The Detroit, her hull shattered and her guns silenced, followed suit moments later. The sight of the two British flagships surrendering sent shockwaves through the remaining vessels of Barclay's squadron. The smaller British vessels Lady Prevost, General Hunter, Little Belt, and Chippewa found themselves surrounded by the American fleet, which had finally been able to bring its numerical superiority to bear. The Lady Prevost, her commander, wounded and her crew decimated, ran aground in shallow water rather than continue the hopeless fight. The General Hunter, her masts shot away and her hull holed below the waterline, surrendered after a brief but fierce resistance. According to contemporary accounts preserved in the Naval Historical Center's archives, the battle's conclusion came with dramatic swiftness once the British line collapsed. The remaining British vessels, seeing their flagships captured and their squadron scattered, began to strike their colors in rapid succession. The Little Belt and Chippewa, the smallest vessels in the British fleet, attempted to escape toward the Canadian shore, but found themselves pursued by the American gunboats Trip and Scorpion. The chase lasted only minutes before both British vessels surrendered, their crews overwhelmed by the superior American numbers and the devastating effectiveness of their pursuers' gunnery. By 4 o'clock in the afternoon, the entire British squadron had been captured or destroyed. The lake fell silent except for the cries of the wounded and the sound of water lapping against the hulls of the battered ships. Perry, standing on the deck of the Niagara, surveyed the scene of American victory with a mixture of triumph and sorrow for the terrible cost of the day's fighting. The smoke of battle cleared to reveal a lake transformed by the carnage of naval warfare. Bodies floated in the bloodied water as the American fleet took possession of the entire British squadron. A victory unprecedented in the annals of naval history. Commander Perry, his uniform torn and stained with powder smoke, began the grim task of counting the cost of his triumph while securing his prizes. The casualties on both sides reflected the savage nature of the 3-hour engagement. The American fleet had suffered 27 killed and 96 wounded, with the Lawrence bearing the heaviest losses. The British squadron had lost 41 killed and 94 wounded, including Captain Barclay, who survived his wounds, but would never again serve at sea. The Detroit alone had lost her captain and first lieutenant, while the Queen Charlotte had been virtually destroyed by American fire. Perry's first act after securing the British vessels was to compose his famous dispatch to General William Henry Harrison, commanding the American forces on the northwestern frontier. Writing on the back of an old envelope, he penned the words that would echo through American history: "We have met the enemy, and they are ours, 2 ships, 2 brigs, 1 schooner, and 1 sloop." The message, brief and matter-of-fact, conveyed the magnitude of the American victory to the anxiously waiting army. The strategic implications of the Battle of Lake Erie extended far beyond the immediate capture of British vessels. Control of the lake meant that British supply lines to their forces in the Northwest Territory had been severed completely. General Henry Proctor, commanding British forces at Detroit, could no longer rely on naval support for his operations against American settlements. The indigenous confederacy led by Tecumseh, dependent on British arms and supplies, faced the prospect of fighting without their European allies. The captured British fleet provided the Americans with immediate tactical advantages. The Detroit, renamed and repaired, became a powerful addition to Perry's squadron. The Queen Charlotte, despite her battle damage, could be restored to service with American crews. The smaller vessels expanded American patrol capabilities, allowing Perry to maintain complete control over the lake's shipping lanes and prevent any British attempt to regain naval supremacy. News of the victory spread rapidly through the American settlements, providing a much-needed boost to morale after the disasters of the war's early campaigns. The burning of Washington and the failed invasion of Canada had left many Americans questioning their ability to fight the British Empire successfully. Perry's triumph demonstrated that American naval forces could defeat the Royal Navy in equal combat, inspiring confidence in the nation's ability to defend itself. The battle's impact on British strategy proved equally significant. The Admiralty in London, faced with the loss of an entire squadron, was forced to acknowledge that maintaining naval supremacy on the Great Lakes required resources that could not be spared. From the war against Napoleon, the decision to abandon attempts to recapture Lake Erie reflected the broader British strategic situation, where European commitments took precedence over American operations. Historical analysis from the Smithsonian Institution's National Museum of American History emphasizes that the Battle of Lake Erie marked the beginning of the end for British power in the Old Northwest, fundamentally altering the balance of power in the region. Captain Barclay, despite his defeat, was acquitted of all charges at his subsequent court-martial, with the court acknowledging that he had fought against overwhelming odds with inadequate resources. His conduct during the battle earned him respect from both British and American naval officers. Though his career effectively ended with his wounds and the loss of his squadron, the victory at Lake Erie sent shock waves through the military and political establishments of both nations, fundamentally altering the strategic landscape of the War of 1812. In Washington, President James Madison and his cabinet received Perry's dispatch with jubilation, recognizing that the naval triumph had transformed the American position in the Northwest Territory from defensive to offensive. The capture of the entire British squadron provided the United States with the naval supremacy necessary to support land operations against British positions in Canada. General William Henry Harrison, commanding American forces in the Northwest, immediately began planning an invasion of Upper Canada now that his supply lines across Lake Erie were secure. The British garrison at Detroit, under General Henry Proctor, found itself in an impossible position. Without naval support, Proctor could not receive reinforcements or supplies, nor could he evacuate his forces if the American advance proved successful. The indigenous confederation under Tecumseh, dependent on British arms and ammunition, faced the prospect of fighting a war without their European allies. The political ramifications in Britain proved equally significant. The Admiralty, already stretched thin by the demands of the Napoleonic Wars, was forced to confront the reality that maintaining naval supremacy on the Great Lakes required resources that could not be spared from European operations. The loss of an entire squadron represented not just a tactical defeat, but a strategic acknowledgement that British power in North America had limits that could be exploited by a determined American resistance. In the indigenous communities of the Northwest Territory, news of the British naval defeat created profound uncertainty about the future. Tecumseh and his confederation had allied with the British based on promises of support for indigenous land rights and sovereignty. The destruction of British naval power on Lake Erie called into question whether Britain could fulfill these commitments, forcing indigenous leaders to reconsider their strategic position in the broader conflict. The American naval victory also had profound implications for the development of the Great Lakes region. Control of Lake Erie meant that American settlers could move westward with greater security, knowing that British naval forces could not intercept their supply lines or support raids against frontier settlements. The economic development of Ohio, Pennsylvania, and New York benefited immediately from the restored safety of lake commerce. International observers, particularly in Europe, took note of the American naval victory as evidence of the young republic's growing military capability. The defeat of a Royal Navy squadron by an improvised American fleet challenged European assumptions about American military weakness and suggested that the United States might emerge from the war as a more formidable power than previously imagined. The Battle of Lake Erie also demonstrated the importance of naval construction and logistics in determining the outcome of military campaigns. Perry's victory had been made possible by the heroic efforts of shipbuilders at Presque Isle, who had constructed an entire fleet from raw materials under the constant threat of British attack. This lesson would influence American naval policy for generations, emphasizing the need for domestic shipbuilding capacity and secure naval bases. According to Theodore Roosevelt's authoritative work, The Naval War of 1812, the Battle of Lake Erie represented the first time in history that an entire British squadron had been captured by an enemy fleet, making it one of the most significant naval victories in American history. The psychological impact of the victory extended beyond military considerations to influence American national identity. The successful defense of the Great Lakes frontier demonstrated that Americans could stand against the world's most powerful Navy and prevail through courage, skill, and determination. This confidence would prove crucial in the later phases of the war. When American forces faced British invasions, along the Atlantic coast and in the Gulf of Mexico. The weeks following the Battle of Lake Erie witnessed a complete transformation of the military situation in the Northwest Territory. General William Henry Harrison, emboldened by naval supremacy, launched his invasion of Upper Canada with the support of Perry's fleet. The British garrison at Detroit, cut off from reinforcements and supplies, found itself in an untenable position as American forces closed in from multiple directions. The Indigenous Confederation under Tecumseh made a desperate last stand at the Battle of the Thames on October 5, 1813. The death of Tecumseh in this engagement effectively ended organized Indigenous resistance in the Northwest Territory, fulfilling one of the major American war aims. British General Henry Proctor, abandoned by his Indigenous allies and facing overwhelming American numbers, retreated deeper into Canada, leaving the entire Northwest Territory under American control. Perry's captured fleet proved instrumental in supporting Harrison's land campaign. The former British vessels, now flying American colors, transported troops and supplies across Lake Erie while preventing any British attempt to regain naval supremacy. The Detroit, renamed and repaired, became the flagship of the American Lake Erie Squadron, serving as a symbol of American naval prowess for years to come. The strategic implications of the victory extended far beyond the immediate military campaign. Control of Lake Erie ensured that the northern frontier of the United States remained secure for the remainder of the war. British attempts to regain control of the lake were half-hearted and ultimately unsuccessful, as the Royal Navy could not spare the resources necessary to construct and maintain a new squadron. While fighting Napoleon in Europe, the battle's impact on American naval development proved equally significant. The success of Perry's improvised fleet demonstrated the importance of domestic shipbuilding capacity and trained naval personnel. Congress, inspired by the victory, authorized the construction of additional warships for the Great Lakes and established permanent naval stations to maintain American control of these crucial waterways. The captured British vessels provided valuable intelligence about Royal Navy construction techniques and armament. American naval architects studied the Detroit and Queen Charlotte carefully, incorporating lessons learned into future ship designs. The integration of British naval technology with American innovation would influence the development of the United States Navy for decades to come. Perry himself became a national hero, receiving accolades from Congress and the American people. His conduct during the battle, particularly his transfer from the crippled Lawrence to the Niagara, became the stuff of legend. The image of the young commander standing in a small boat under enemy fire, carrying his battle flag to a fresh ship, captured the American imagination and reinforced the nation's growing confidence in its military capabilities. The diplomatic consequences of the victory also proved significant. Britain's inability to maintain naval supremacy on the Great Lakes weakened its negotiating position in the peace talks that would eventually end the war. The Treaty of Ghent, signed in December 1814, reflected the military realities created by battles like Lake Erie, where American forces had successfully defended their territory against British attack. Modern naval historians continue to study the Battle of Lake Erie as a classic example of how naval supremacy can determine the outcome of land campaigns. The victory demonstrated that control of transportation routes, whether rivers, lakes, or oceans, remains crucial to military success. This lesson influenced American naval strategy throughout the 19th century and contributed to the development of the doctrine of sea power that would make the United States a global naval force. The battle also highlighted the importance of leadership in naval combat. Perry's decision to transfer his flag from the Lawrence to the Niagara proved decisive in achieving victory, demonstrating that personal courage and tactical flexibility could overcome material disadvantages. His example inspired generations of American naval officers and contributed to the development of the aggressive, offensive spirit that characterized the United States Navy. The Battle of Lake Erie stands as one of the most decisive naval engagements in American history, its consequences rippling through the decades to influence the development of the United States as a continental power. The victory established American naval credibility on the world stage and demonstrated that the young republic possessed the technical skill and fighting spirit necessary to challenge the greatest naval power of the age. The immediate aftermath of the battle saw the complete collapse of British power in the Northwest Territory. The death of Tecumseh at the Battle of the Thames, made possible by Perry's naval victory, ended indigenous resistance east of the Mississippi River and opened vast territories to American settlement. The Ohio Valley, Michigan Territory, and the lands around the Great Lakes became secure American possessions, contributing to the westward expansion that would define the 19th century. The battle's influence on American naval doctrine proved equally enduring. The success of Perry's aggressive tactics, particularly his decision to close with the enemy despite superior British long-range firepower, became a model for future naval commanders. The principle of bringing maximum force to bear at the decisive point, demonstrated so effectively at Lake Erie, would guide American naval strategy through the Civil War and beyond. The construction of Perry's fleet at Presque Isle established precedents for American naval logistics that would prove crucial in later conflicts. The ability to build and maintain naval forces in remote locations, using local resources and improvised facilities, became a hallmark of American naval capability. This flexibility would prove essential during the Civil War, when the Union Navy constructed dozens of vessels on interior waterways to support military operations. The captured British vessels served American interests for decades after the battle. The Detroit, renamed and extensively modified, remained in service until the 1830s, patrolling the Great Lakes and maintaining American naval supremacy. The Queen Charlotte, despite her battle damage, was restored to service and used for training purposes, helping to develop the cadre of experienced naval officers who would lead American forces in future conflicts. The battle's impact on American national identity cannot be overstated. Perry's victory demonstrated that American naval forces could defeat the Royal Navy in equal combat, challenging European assumptions about American military weakness. The confidence gained from this victory contributed to the aggressive foreign policy that would characterize American diplomacy throughout the 19th century. From the Monroe Doctrine to the Mexican-American War, the strategic lessons of Lake Erie influenced American military thinking for generations. The importance of controlling interior waterways, demonstrated so effectively by Perry's squadron, led to the development of riverine warfare capabilities that would prove crucial. During the Civil War, the success of improvised naval forces, built from local materials and manned by volunteers, became a model for American military mobilization in future conflicts. Modern historians continue to debate the battle's significance in the broader context of the War of 1812. While some argue that the war's outcome was determined by European events beyond American control, the victory at Lake Erie demonstrated that American forces could achieve decisive results. When properly led and equipped, the battle proved that the United States possessed the military capability necessary to defend its territory and interests against any foreign power. The memorial to the Battle of Lake Erie, located on South Bass Island in Ohio, serves as a reminder of the sacrifice and heroism displayed by both American and British forces during the engagement. The monument, dedicated in 1915, honors the memory of all who fought and died in the battle, regardless of nationality, recognizing that courage and honor are not limited by national boundaries. The enduring legacy of the Battle of Lake Erie lies not just in its immediate military consequences, but in its demonstration of American resilience and determination. Faced with the world's most powerful navy, a young republic chose to fight rather than surrender, building a fleet from raw materials and manning it with volunteers who had never seen naval combat. Their victory proved that free men, fighting for their homes and liberties, could overcome seemingly insurmountable odds through courage, skill, and unwavering determination. The battle remains a testament to the power of American ingenuity and the enduring strength of democratic institutions under pressure. In the crucible of combat on Lake Erie, the United States proved that it had earned its place among the nations of the world, capable of defending its interests and protecting its citizens against any threat. The thunder of cannons that echoed across the lake on September 10, 1813, announced the arrival of America as a naval power and marked the beginning of the nation's rise to global prominence.